Good morning, everybody. Welcome to 1 Million Cups. It's great to be here this morning. Glad to see everybody. We've got a great presenter today. We have Spence from Armchair Telethon. He is going to come and tell us a little bit about his business. Sean has actually presented at numerous 1 Million Cups, so we're very happy to have him here today. So without further ado, we'll get started. Sean, take it away.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen here, my little presentation. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Spence. I'm CEO of Armchair Telethon, the 100% online, easy for you fundraiser. Never leave your armchair. That's me, and I'm very excited to be here at 1 Million Cups. The problem that we help solve is very simple. One, we're actually a couple of problems. One, nonprofits and others need money. Two, they need to get their message out. Three, they need to do this less expensively and inexpensively as possible. Every nonprofit on the planet has to deal with these things. We are a solution. We create virtual telethons to raise money and awareness that absolutely change the game. Now, for those, most of us in this room are of an age where we grew up with the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon with Jerry Lewis or with the Children's Miracle Network Telethon, but those who are, much younger don't have the same experience that we do with that, and so I always have to explain just a little bit. A telethon, very simply, is long-form entertainment. There used to be telethons like the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon on TV, and it might be as much as 24 hours. And what it would be every kind of entertainer you can imagine. So musicians, dancers, magicians, hypnotists, whatever it is, right? So all kinds of great entertainers over like 24 hours. And in between those entertainers, somebody would come on and talk about whatever the charity was, muscular dystrophy or children's charities or whatever it was, and they would do a pitch for why they needed money. And so millions of people would come to watch this on TV. Remember, there were only like 3 channels. And then a very small percentage of the watchers would call in and make a pledge and give money to whatever the charity was. But because of the law of large numbers, a tiny, tiny percentage of millions of people is still a lot of people, and they raised millions of dollars. They were a big, big deal. So that's what we do. We take that whole thing and we put the whole thing on the internet. Everybody is participating virtually. It's managed virtually. The entertainers perform virtually, just from wherever they are. The speakers, the charity, people watch it on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn and other platforms. So it's all one great big virtual entertainment that appears in various places on the web. And in the end, it raises money for nonprofits and some other purposes that we could talk about in Q&A if you want to. But our primary market is nonprofit organizations. So think your Boys and Girls Club, United Way, Food Bank. We actually have a client in North Carolina, the USO of North Carolina. So I'm really enjoying that, getting to work with a statewide telethon there for North Carolina. So it's going to involve Fayetteville and everywhere else. So just think of nonprofit organizations. That's our primary target market. Our business model is very simple. Thanks to some proprietary processes, I can do what I do absolutely anywhere, right? I'm in Columbia, Missouri, and we can do it anywhere. So I have a client in North Carolina. We have a client in Arizona. We have a client here locally. We have clients all over the country. We've been active, really, we've done, I think, 16, 17 states so far. We've been in business for under a year. We're about to hit a year sometime soon. Other part of our business model, we charge a fee. It's a flat fee. It's on our website, armchairtelethon.com. And the business pays it, we do the work, we go away. Very simple. Cash flow is good because they pay up front. So cash flow is great, as you might imagine, and it all works very well. Whoops, there we go. Secret sauce, I have a small first mover advantage. It actually is larger than I thought it was going to be. I still do not have any truly national competition, right? Somebody who's located one place doing these things all over the country. I'm still it, right? Armchair Telethon is the only game in town nationally doing this sort of thing. We have proprietary processes, which I can go into more in Q&A if you want to. Really, it's just smart, organized, systematized networking is what it all comes down to. But it is stuff I've been developing and creating over most of the last 30 years. I have a national network of super connected influencers and an amazing team. I have like on my advisory board, I have a 3-star general. I have a guy who was a part of the Netscape IPO, which was at the time the largest IPO in history. I have a woman who has George Clooney's cell phone number and he'll call her back, right? So we could talk about that also in Q&A if you wanted to, because the lessons I've learned about building that kind of network of super connected influencers is something that can be applied really to any business or nonprofit or whatever. Competitive analysis, like I said, today there's little or no truly or national competition. That's not going to last, but it is right now. It's still really great. Within 3 to 5 years, I think every nonprofit in the country is either going to be doing a telethon or trying to figure out how to do a telethon. It's just like another tool in the toolbox for nonprofits. And of course, in a larger sense, there are other ways to raise money. So that's my competition really, is having people deciding what are all the ways we're going to raise money, what are all the ways we're going to get our name out. Traction. We've been profitable since the first month. And in fact, really before the first month, I had to create the LLC and open a bank account to get my first money, because I had checks in hand before I had a bank account. And so I had to open that bank account in order to get my money. Our goal is to grow at least an average of 15% a month. And we've been doing a little bit better than that. And it's really going great. We should be able to fund growth through cash flow. But at some point we may choose to raise money. We could talk about that also in Q&A and kind of the struggle I have internally over whether I want to do that or not. Questions someone might ask. And this is just stuff that if you knew my story, you might ask these things in Q&A. It could lead to some good discussion. Scan it really quick because I'm not going to read through the whole thing. But these are just some things that you might enjoy talking about. Thank you, 1 Million Cups. I'm Sean Spence at Armchair Telethon. Let's do Q&A. It's my favorite part.
So Sean, you mentioned that your Armchair Telethon is actually dominating the market currently, but you anticipate in 3 to 5 years you're going to have lots of competition. How are you going to set yourself apart? I mean, how do you plan to compete with the competition?
Great question. Really, it's probably going to be that we have the most experience, the largest network. What I'm trying to do is anticipate that time and get as big as we can, as quickly as we can, which really has been the tactic or strategy from the beginning. Because I really did think, I mean, we're almost a year old, and I really thought we would have more competitors by now, and we don't. But we're still preparing for that. So honestly, doing this kind of thing, we've done more of them than anybody in the country. So we have learned all the lessons, not all of them, but we've learned a lot of lessons. We've made a lot of mistakes. We're constantly improving what we do, refining what we do, figuring out where our time is best spent. And so mostly we're going to compete by and set ourselves apart by doing the best job of anybody, and having the most references and all of that. And I think really that is always going to be how it is. Now, I've created a really large network that I've had and have been creating for years as a result of a bunch of different things. I have a very diverse employment background, which actually includes starting my own companies, and I'm a serial entrepreneur and all this sort of thing. So what that's led to is a very large network. And that's another thing that really would does set us apart. So I guess the short answer is we're going to set ourselves apart with execution and really just getting out there and being the best at what we do.
Okay, thank you. We also have a question from Don. He says, it sounds like a great idea. How did you build the network of influencers?
Oh, sure. I love to talk about that. Part of that is the career I've had. I've had a very kind of strange career. I got my start in politics and ended up doing politics at a fairly high level, working on political campaigns with my start in fundraising, and then I managed campaigns and that sort of thing. But so think about that. So in politics, and especially in the fundraising end of things, it's just so network building focused. And so over the years, I've built a network, and I've just had a very systematic approach for most of the last 30 years to building a network, and I've held on to those people, but I've also been building systems and tactics and strategies to expand that network and get to know people. And so, you know, with limited connections in North Carolina, for example, we're able to build the USO. We're working for the USO to build their telethon. And so we're able to build a network of people there and get them involved, some of whom are already connected to the USO and some are not. But I've just learned how to reach people. Now, I will tell you that probably my two biggest secrets are, one, just to contact people, right? Contact them, ask them something, reach out to people. Now, if I reach out to one person, then, you know, maybe the odds are that that person is going to say no, or not care, or not respond, or whatever, right? Like if I decided I needed somebody in the military and I reached out to one, then maybe the odds are they're not even going to respond to me. But if I reach out to 100 people in the military, because I built up a large list, then 1 or 2 or 3% of those people respond. And then that provides the beginning of a list. And then that gives me a list to start building on. And then they have connections, and maybe they want to help me reach somebody else, and then slowly expanding that network. So I've been doing that for years, for many, many years. I learned that in fundraising, most people you ask for money are going to say no. But once you get one, now they're in your network, and you can grow your network from that person or from that group of people. And so that's always it. Ask lots of people, get a few of them to say yes, and to then build that relationship with them, and then increase that relationship from there. So like my 3-star general is somebody that, now he is somebody who I actually knew locally, who is in my Rotary, right? I'd met him, I didn't know him, I asked him to coffee, right? Then somebody else who is on my advisory board, let's say, well, I got a guy who I met when I used to live in Boise, and I'd met him there. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, right? And I emailed him and said, hey, I'm doing this thing, Armchair Telethon. Would you like to know more about it? And he happened to say yes. Well, I emailed a bunch of people who said no. So that's it. Reach out to lots of people, then hold on to those connections you make and grow from those connections. And whatever your business is, whatever your organization is, just start thinking about what's the universe of people who potentially are going to care about this thing I'm doing, and then just start reaching out to them and inviting them to be a part of it in some way. Create an advisory board, have a brainstorming session, ask 10 or 20 or 30 times more people than you actually need, and get a small percentage of those involved and go from there.
I have one more question, Sean.
Sure.
Will you tell us where Armchair Telethon came from? I know that we had this discussion a little bit before the meeting started. So would you elaborate, please?
Sure. Absolutely. Very often, I'm sitting in my home office right now. Very often, when I talk to a 1 Million Cups, I'm actually sitting in the armchair where this company was invented, which is in my living room. But that's it. The way this all started is, like I said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been a turnaround guy, and I had gone to work with an organization that was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had like $2,000 or $3,000 in the bank, and I worked for them for 18 months. And when I left, they had, or almost 2 years, they had over $150,000 in the bank, and I built up a staff and all the stuff, right? So then that's what I did, and I was done. So I left. And I hadn't yet figured out what I was going to do. And so I was just kind of piddling around and figuring out, am I going to go to work for somebody? Am I going to start something? What am I going to do? And then COVID hit, right? And it became much harder to do anything. And so I'm sitting at home bored, like all of us are, and looking for stuff to do, like all of us are. And I'm a very community-minded guy. And I was trying to figure out something I could do to make the world a better place and to help my community, and something that I uniquely might be able to do. And I don't know why, but on Friday afternoon, the idea of doing a virtual telethon, and I'd never seen those two words together, just popped into my head. So I thought, I'm going to do a virtual telethon. I'm going to create it, and we'll do the whole thing just like Jerry Lewis used to do, and we'll broadcast the whole thing to the internet, and we'll raise some money, and who knows if it's going to actually make any money or not, but who cares, because it's not going to cost anything, and I'll just build the whole thing. And so like I said, I had that idea. It pops into my head on Friday at about 2:00. For stupid reasons that have more to do with me being kind of stupid, I decided to do that 8 days later. So between the time I had the idea and the time we created what ended up being one of the largest, most involved events I've ever done in my life, it was 8 days. And we ended up we created a 12-hour virtual telethon. 3 days before the telethon on Wednesday, I still didn't know exactly how the technology was going to work. Didn't know how I was going to exactly make it happen. And fortunately, we figured that out on Wednesday, Thursday. And we did this whole thing, and we ended up working with the local community foundation, we ended up raising over $32,000, and we involved lots of people in the community, and we recruited, it was 12 hours, so it was like 40 or 50 performers and speakers and all of this stuff, this huge event. And again, $35,000 or $32,000, and no real overhead. No overhead really at all. Honestly, the whole thing cost us a couple of $100, and I just paid for it out of my pocket. And so all that money went to the community foundation. And as I'm doing this, like I said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I thought, I could do this anywhere. And this has a real value. We've just created this fundraiser out of nothing in 8 days, and we're raising serious money, $32,000 in 8 days. And so I should do this as a business. Maybe I should just see if that would work, because I could do it anywhere in the country. So that's it. The whole thing was created literally sitting in my armchair in my living room. And my wife said, why don't you call it Armchair Telethon? And my wife is much smarter than I am. And I said, that's a great idea, honey. That's what we'll call it. That's Armchair Telethon.
Well, I want to jump in because I'm curious. I'm sure you've gotten feedback from different people, from viewers, the people you work with, the performers, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that feedback I'm sure has been positive, and some probably not quite as positive, which could be enlightening to you. What kind of lessons have you learned from any negative feedback you've gotten?
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of a bad answer to that, Cindy. It is really a great question. And I'm going to try to give you a better answer to this, but I'm going to start out with the first part of the answer, which is in some ways very unique to me, which is I do try to immediately learn from negative or constructive or whatever feedback, right? Of course, I work very hard to learn from my mistakes and just learn from things that don't work and whatever, and then move on. I then move on very quickly, and I don't think about it anymore. So if you were to say, Sean, what are the 3 things that happened in the last week that you learned from? I really honestly would have a very hard time telling you that, answering that question, not because I didn't learn from things, but because I do learn from them. And then I move on and I just focus so little on things that are not positive. Internalize it, move on. Now, what I will say is that, of course, I've learned a lot about, the production value of what we do and ways to raise money and what works best, what customers make the most sense for us. And then also we've learned a lot about, expanding and being able to work with different kinds of customers. We haven't really had anybody say that's a bad idea, which I kind of wish they would. I would be happy to have somebody come say, Sean, that's a bad idea. And then we can have that conversation and then I'll learn from it and I'll move on, right? I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, so I've had a lot of really bad ideas. So as a serial entrepreneur, I've had many failures. My mother once said to me, which is something only a mother can say, she said, Sean, it just amazes me. You have failed so much and you just get up and move on and never think about it again and go do the next thing, right? So really only a mother can get away with saying that to you, but that is kind of my approach. So I've learned a lot, but I just move on and then try to keep making it better.
Okay, so let me volley that back at you in a different way then. Since you started to where you are now, what are a couple of things that you went, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it that way back then, or I can't believe I didn't think about that, or just something, 2 really important lessons you've learned from where you started to where you are now?
Sure. The very first one that comes to mind, and by the way, I have learned a lot of things that I'm happy to talk about that were just stupid, dumb luck, right? There's a bunch of stuff we do now that in a million years, I wouldn't have decided to do it. It just happened. And if you'd said, Sean, do you want to do this? I would have said, no, that's stupid. But then it turned out to not be. But the first big one is that the first telethon we did was 12 hours. And I just picked that number out of the air. And that just seemed like enough to do a great big, telethon. We'll do it for 12 hours and that's it. I just chose it because it sounded good. And then what we learned, and I honestly did not learn this because remember, I didn't really know how the technology was going to work until Wednesday, Thursday, before the event on Saturday. So then what we learned at roughly the same time is that Facebook, where we were going to broadcast it, right? We use a streaming platform where we manage everything. And it's called StreamYard, which I recommend. In fact, there's some 1 Million Cups that use StreamYard, but it's a really great way if you're going to do virtual performances or even some kinds of virtual meetings, conferences, that sort of thing. StreamYard can be good. And you manage the whole thing on StreamYard, and then it broadcasts to Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and some other places. And what I learned when I figured out that we were going to use StreamYard is that Facebook has a limit of 8 hours, right? So of streaming. So if you're going to stream a video, like I know we could stream this YouTube, or not YouTube, Zoom, we could stream the Zoom to Facebook. Well, Facebook limits you to 8 hours. So with 2 or 3 days left to go until my event, I figure out it's going to get cut off automatically at 8 hours. And YouTube has a limit of 10 hours. So now I had told everybody, we're going to send it to Facebook, we're going to send it to YouTube. And I told everybody that, right? So I didn't want to back off on that if I didn't have to. And it's going to be 12 hours, and we'd advertise that. So I had to figure out what we were going to do. And in the end, what we ended up doing was I cut it in half, right? So we did it for 6 hours. And then everybody who was there as an audience, I had to say, okay, go here to see that, to click on the new URL, right? And we provide it in a few different places. But you're going to have to go away and find the other link, click the link, and come back, right? So they had to do that. And at that point, we don't know if anybody's going to come back or not. Fortunately, they did. We actually made more money in the second 6 hours of that telethon than in the first 6 hours. So it all went well. But the lesson learned there was our telethons are now about 8 hours, right? They're like 7 hours and 50 minutes or so, and it can spill over just a little bit. But that's a really huge lesson that we learned, just honestly, because I was being kind of stupid about it. And then we've learned lots of lessons just about the content and about what works and what doesn't work, and about the way money is raised and the way money is not raised. And for the very first one, we didn't have sponsors or anything, which is so typical for a fundraising event, but we just didn't have them for the first one because I had 8 days, right? Because I decided to have this event on the spur of the moment. So then once we started having more time, then we started incorporating, bringing in sponsors. And like, I've got a telethon on Saturday that's already brought in through sponsors and then other means, has already brought in over $27,000, right? And we haven't even had the event yet. So, we're going to have a great Saturday. I'm very excited about it. And we've seen that happen over and over again. So these are some of the lessons that we've learned.
I see Aaron had a comment question that I think is a good one. He said, do you think no feedback is almost worse than negative feedback?
Yeah, I do. And that's why I was trying to be careful to say, it's not that I don't listen to Sean, that's a stupid idea because, or maybe you should do, or somebody being super nice about it or whatever. I do listen to it. And I tell you, please listen to it. Just don't fixate on it. Listen to it, learn from it, make whatever changes are appropriate, and then just forget about it and move on and never think about it and just move forward. But yeah, if there's no feedback, then yeah, what do you learn from? And that's one of the biggest values that I've had from 1 Million Cups is suggestions that I've gotten, feedback, and certainly, particularly in the early, I've talked to something over 60 now, and I've had plenty of people that have given me suggestions about things, and I try to always learn from that. So yeah, we desperately, as entrepreneurs, we desperately need that feedback. Like I said, I've had several companies that have failed, many companies that have failed, but really they failed before they truly became full-fledged companies, because I've always incorporated ways to get feedback very quickly. And fortunately, somewhere I read very early, because I read lots and lots of business stuff, right? If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, be somebody who reads a lot. Or if you just hate reading, or you're dyslexic, or you have some issue, watch lots and lots of videos on YouTube. But I've learned so much. And one of the very earliest things I read, I think when I was probably, just out of college, was somebody who said, fail fast, right? Failing is fine, but fail fast, because it's cheaper to fail fast. You can move on, you can learn, and you move on to the next thing. And so I just learned very early on how to fail very quickly. And that's what I would encourage anybody to do. Fail quickly, move on. So like when I created a veggie burger business, right? That lasted about 3 months. and I lost probably $1,000 on it. So I've never lost more than a couple of $1,000s on a business because I had the failing fast and moved on to the next thing.
So how does Armchair Telethon differ from like a GoFundMe?
Pretty radically. But I do get that question, Lori. It really surprised me the first time I got it, because, and you know, I'm in the middle of it, right? So, of course, it's very clear to me how it would be different. But they are just very different. So you look at a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or, you know, any of those kind of crowdfunding places. One, the majority of them, it's like 60% of them fail. So that's certainly one big difference, because like 95% of our telethons succeed at a very high level. So that's certainly a big difference. But you look at a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe or whatever, and you can have a situation where it takes on a life of its own and raises a bunch of money from people you don't know. But again, that's a pretty small number. Where you get your money from there is, first you've got to have something that really brings in money from people that you know. So if you were going to do a GoFundMe, you better have a campaign to raise a bunch of money from people you know. And then maybe you're also advertising to raise money from people that you don't know. And then once you reach a certain level, I don't know what that level is, and I'm sure it's different for every platform, then it kind of kicks in and they start sharing you, and then it, you know, becomes a self-perpetuating thing and can raise a lot of money. That's very rare, but it does happen every day. What we do is we're really more like a fundraising event, right? And it is. I mean, that's what you should think about these telethons is as a fundraising event. So we allow you to reach people, and that's really the value of it, is through the marketing of it. We build a mechanism that reaches lots and lots of people. It really brings in the people who want to be supportive. We also, you know, provide a great mechanism for sponsors. The USO Telethon, for example, that we're doing there in North Carolina, they had a $25,000 sponsor that had sponsored an event that they were going to do, and they had to cancel the event because of COVID. And so we then immediately provided a place where that $25,000 can go. So now that sponsor is just sponsoring us, and they get to keep their $25,000, and the sponsor's happy, and they're happy, and everybody's happy. So we are really an event that reaches out and brings new people. And because of a variety of mechanisms, which I'm happy to go into more detail about, but we reach lots and lots of people and raise money in the same way that a fundraising event would. Now, what I'm getting ready to do, I want to see what happens when you pair what we do with a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or something like that, because we provide that early stage money. Does it then allow you to have the network effect of Kickstarter or GoFundMe? Does it kick that in, right? So could we provide the early stage money and then their thing kicks in and you raise a lot more money? I don't know. We're going to see, because I'm getting ready to do an event in several months from now that I'm going to pair with Kickstarter to see if it really does kickstart.
I'll be interested to hear how that goes, Sean. Hopefully
You and me
you can
both,
come
Laura.
back and let us know how that works out.
Sure. Yeah, that's actually going to be a national telethon that we're going to do. And we've done a few national telethons now. That's going to be for multiple sclerosis. So that'll be interesting.
I have a question for you. This is something that we deal with in our occupation as well. When COVID hit and people are quarantined, people were extremely excited by something different, someone to talk to, something to do. And so and a lot of people did things like of your nature or anything really for distraction, entertainment. But the longer people were in quarantine, and even those of us who have been back at work for a while now and still have to do the Zoom meetings and the other things, we are experiencing what a lot of people are feeling now, not only the stress from the pandemic, but we're starting to get some technology fatigue where we've been sitting in front of a computer attached to that. We just want to get away from our devices for a while and it's really odd because our society was actually going in the opposite direction before the pandemic. If you couldn't get people off their phones, now it's like, do I have to sit into another electronic, whatever. So since a lot of your business does use the electronics and the technology, how are you going to combat when people are feeling that electronic and technology fatigue?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Cindy, and it leads to a few different things for us. And obviously, it's incredibly important to us. And we have seen some of that fatigue. But in the end, this is, number one, let me say this. The success of what we do and why a telethon, a virtual telethon, is a good idea is not because of COVID. COVID was just the starter gun, right? It was the signal that this was a thing that could exist. And other people came up with the idea at the same time that I did. And then they are happening all over the country now. Just generally they're local people who are creating them. So sorry for a second there, I'm starting to lose track of what I'm saying. But it's not because of COVID, it let us know. Why it's successful is because of what you also just alluded to, trends of the way the internet is developing, the way online donation is developing, the way entertainment is being consumed, and that evolution, and the evolution of social media, which we've seen, on a major upward trajectory for a long time. All four of those things, years and decades. And we will see it like that, I believe, for decades. We'll see that continue. And it's the convergence of those things, and that's why what we're doing makes sense. Now, I promise, Cindy, I am actually answering your question. I'm just providing the environment for that. So what we're seeing then is, then we're also seeing the fatigue with this kind of thing. And in the end, what we're talking about is one more tool in the toolbox. So in the same way that for any event a nonprofit ever does, you're going to hear from people, oh my God, if I have to go to one more rubber chicken dinner, I'm going to choke myself, right? So we hear that about whatever it is that we're going to do. If I have to go to another trivia night, if I have to, oh my God, I get so many fundraising letters in the mail, and I just got another fundraising email, and all of these sorts of things. So there's really there can be fatigue with anything. And in the end, most of the people who hear about what you're doing are not going to respond or care, but a percentage will. And so what we are is a part of the nonprofit mix. So if the Boys and Girls Club decided, okay, we're only going to raise money with virtual telethons for the rest of our lives, that would be stupid, right? They would have a small percentage of people who would give, and they would raise a bunch of money, but nowhere near what they need to, right? So the last Boys and Girls Club thing we did raised over $50,000. It was a huge success. But that Boys and Girls Club their budget is $2 million, right? So we're just one more really nice fundraising event for them. And it made sense for a lot of their donors, but obviously not all of their donors. So that's how you want to think about it, is just as a part of the mix of what we're doing. And what we do is allow you to reach lots and lots of people. Some of those people are going to care. Most of those people probably are not going to care, but enough are going to care to give us a success. And it's a great mix with the fundraising letters, the fundraising email, the fundraising events, the personal asks, all of those things. And that's why it makes sense. And it will continue to make sense. And we'll see it go up and down, in the same way that, every event has a lifespan, right? So if your local charity has had, your local heart association has done the heart ball, they may have done it for 20 years, but at some point, the heart ball is going to peter out and they're going to need to move on and do something else. And it's the same thing with this. So do this, ride this horse until it's too tired to keep riding, and then move on to something else, and then bring it back a few years later. That's how it'll end up being when we're looking back 50 years from now. That's what it'll be.
Sean, Don Matheson, I think you've got a great idea. It never occurred to me as a marketer to work with nonprofits after they will wear you out on a personal basis, right? You start doing one thing for them and then you end up on the phone making calls yourself. It's amazing. But yeah, it sounds like a good idea. How do you, if I went to your website, it's just pretty well laid out. How do you define the parameters of a little sprint, and then the local, and then regional, and then nationwide? What are the geofencing things you do for that?
Sure. Really, if we do anything, well, one, just so that everybody else understands, two things. One, our website stinks. I appreciate what you just said, Don. I really, really do. But it stinks. And we're getting ready to replace it. That's the website that we kind of threw up almost a year ago now. And so we're getting ready to finally replace it and make it more SEO friendly and all of these things. And so it's going to look like a million times better. But go take a look at it, armchairtelethon.com. The other thing that Don mentioned is a sprint. So we've got a telethon, and then we created, which is always based on 8 hours now. And then we created a shorter version called a telesprint that is 3 hours generally. Don, I'll tell you, I've ended up not liking the telesprint so much, and I think I'm probably just going to stop doing it entirely. At this point, I do it if somebody asks me to, or at least I'll discuss that. But we don't have any that we're doing now, and the 8 hours has ended up working out really, really well, and that's really where that's one of the lessons, Cindy, that we've learned, is that 8 hours can make a really big difference, not because people are coming for and attending for 8 hours, although there are people who do, but because it just allows so much variety. So Cindy's got time in the morning so she can come. Then the other thing that Don is referring to is we have pricing for local smaller cities up to $500,000, local larger cities over $500,000, statewide, and national telethons. That pricing is frankly a little stupid. Not for our customers. It works out really well for our customers. It's a little dumb for me, although not super dumb because it's still profitable for us. But in the end, Don, what we learned is that, again, that's this pricing that got set up, the day I started having to price this. I had to come up with something, and that made sense. But in the end, the cost of what we do doesn't actually have very much at all to do with the population size. There's some other factors, So we're really going to be changing that. But we haven't yet, so it still is what it is. If you do anything locally, it's broadcast nationally. And so we have charities that they're doing a little local telethon, and they might raise money from 10 or 20 different states, which we've seen that happen over and over again. More what that has to do with, Dawn, is where my team is going to spend its effort, right? So the USO of North Carolina is doing a statewide telethon, and that means we're going to be looking at people to help us in Fayetteville and Durham and, wherever. And we're really focusing on getting people involved from all over the state. If just Durham, somebody in Durham hired us to do one just for Durham, then that's where we would spend our effort. But then other people, the organization might reach out to, the executive director might reach out to her friends who live in other states. And of course, people do. So in the end, it just determines where we're going to spend our time. And we do end up seeing that, of course, the reach is much further geographically than the local or the statewide or even the national.
Do we have any more questions? If not, I'm going to take the last question, Sean. What can this community do for you? How can we help?
Well, you could do a favor for me, and you could do a favor for somebody else at the same time. If you've got a nonprofit that you have a relationship with, I guarantee you they need to raise money. They need to raise awareness. Feel free to send them my way. Send them to armchairtelethon.com or send me an email and introduce us. If we can help them, we would love to. But even if we can't, I'm a nonprofit guy. That's a big part of who I've been my entire professional life. And I'm happy to have a conversation with them to help them succeed related to what we're doing, even if they don't end up hiring us, or even if we don't think they're a good fit for us. We would be happy to talk to them and give them information that will help them. And maybe they decide to do their own telethon, and we could give them tips for that, and that'd be fine too. So introduce us to nonprofits. We'd love to have those introductions.
Okay, Sean, thanks so much for coming today. It's been a pleasure. I hope you come back. We're gonna stay around. If anybody has any further questions, they can talk with Sean. If not, we'll see you guys next week. We have our presenter coming next week, Selflessly. We'll come and talk a little bit about their business. And then the following week, we have Lindsay with Neck Knots. Lindsay is actually was a student here at Fayetteville Tech. So we'll be glad to hear her story as well. Again, thanks everybody. Have a great day. Hope to see you back next week. Tell a friend, bring a friend. We'd love to have them.